Hello, and welcome to the introductory video of the TrackREX tool, or TrackREX for short. In this presentation we will cover some concepts and challenges CRF to vendor reconciliation has and how TrackREX can be a viable solution. We'll try and make this presentation as visual and interesting as possible. Well, as interesting as this topic can be at least. Let's get started. So, what is TrackREX and what is its purpose? TrackREX, otherwise known as TrackREX, is an Excel-based solution for CRF to vendor reconciliation and oversight. It is a tool that has been pre-built by experienced data managers as an industry-standard solution to reconciliation, requiring no recoding for each implementation. Can run on any type of vendor data that requires a match between CRF exposure timing and sampling, for example, PK, biomarker, other labs, or non-lab data such as ECGs. Being system independent, can run on any type of CRF or vendor systems. Has immense potential for scalability, providing a very familiar interface across multiple studies, teams, and therapeutic areas. Can be used cross-functionally, cutting down on duplicated efforts in not only CRF to vendor reconciliation, but also sample tracking. Using built-in off-the-shelf Excel functionality, an application over 40 years of age has the potential to outlast many other programmatic solutions or software. As mentioned, we'll keep this presentation as visual as possible. So let's take a look at the TrackREX output. At each refresh, raw data, or SDTM data, if recent, is loaded into the TrackREX program. This will generate a file with 4 worksheets. A Get Started worksheet, the User Output worksheet, a Redundant Records worksheet and a Metrics worksheet. The Get Started worksheet is both a table of contents and a summary of the refresh itself. A refresh summary is provided. Any unusual numbers between refreshes may provide an early indication that something is at fault with the data coming from the CRF or vendor, such as an incomplete vendor transfer. Scrolling down, we come to a section entitled Validation and Documentation. This provides a summary of the records that were available in raw data. In addition, an embedded validation file is available. This file is a simple, unformatted, log file. It provides a summary of raw data that was fed into the TrackREX program. It lists the raw data, then how the raw data was converted to become TrackREX readable in format. Derived data which lists specific effective attributes based on the date of a record, such as effective protocol, as well as stipulating if a record was destined for the report or not, and, if so, what row is the record associated with in the user output. In effect, this lists the journey an item of data went on as the TrackREX program ran, whilst each item of data can always be referenced back to the source system, such as EDC or vendor transfers. More on validation, testing, and documentation is covered in a later video. However, as you can see with each and every refresh, validation logs are available, demonstrating a tool that is repeatedly validated at each and every refresh. Scrolling down further, we come to a summary of the edit checks that were selected for use on this study, together with counts of how many times they fired. We will not go into detail here. You can slow or pause the video to see what kind of edit checks are available. Working with the TrackREX team, a client can decide what edit checks to include or not. Let's now move on to the user output. This is the most important worksheet because this is where all the work is performed. Each row represents a record. A record is defined as either a scheduled moment from the protocol table of events or as a vendor record that is in excess of the protocol table of events. Essentially, all theoretical and actual events are present, one row at a time. Let's turn on the help text as we cover the user output in more detail. The first columns are key identifier information to include the country, the site, the subject, and the time point itself. Next we come to the body of the user output. In this example, we have a dummy study created for PK vendor reconciliation. But it is important to know that this tool will run on any type of data that requires reconciliation between CRF exposure data and vendor data and will work in any therapeutic area. It is also worth noting that when you first start working with the TrackREX team, you, or the client, decide which of the available columns are present and in what order. But let's focus on the contents of this dummy PK output. The first column of the body of the report is the effective schedule at the date of a record. In our dummy PK study, we have 2 treatment arms and 2 protocol versions. 2 arms and 2 protocol means there are multiple schedules overall. The way this column is worded will depend on your type of study, but the key take-home is this. If your study is collecting the moment a new protocol is signed into, or the moment a subject enters a new cohort or arm, or any other criteria impacting a schedule, it will recognize the new expectations concerning sampling. This is very important for studies that have multiple schedules and/or protocol amendments. For example, if a subject entered a new schedule and the site continued on the previous schedule, you will want to become aware of these protocol violations very quickly. This can be a very complex concept to explain. Let's try and illustrate this further with a more simple scenario. In this case, we have 2 protocol versions. Protocol version 1 has a 4-hour and a 6-hour sample expectation. Protocol version 2 does not have these. Instead, it has a new 8-hour sample expectation. The TrackREX program, when running, firstly creates an expectation for all samples, but then opens or closes out expectations depending on what protocol version a subject is signed into. So, imagine each sample expectation to be a pigeonhole. A subject mid-study signs into protocol version 2. From this moment on, the TrackREX program recognizes the 4-hour and 6-hour samples are no longer expected and closes off this expectation. Imagine, further, that each sample is a pigeon with its own designated pigeonhole. The pre-dose sample is still expected and the TrackREX program accepts this as a scheduled sample. The same is true of the 2-hour and 12-hour samples. However, should the site fail to adapt to the new schedule the subject is under, they may continue to take the 4-hour and 6-hour samples. The TrackREX program will reject these as scheduled samples and, instead, list them as unscheduled samples. The missing 8-hour sample is then flagged as missing. This is why the vastly improved automation TrackREX offers and its ability to be refreshed frequently is central for full oversight and to limit protocol violations. As you can imagine, in conventional reconciliation the introduction of a new schedule would likely result in programming new listings. But with TrackREX, the TrackREX team simply add the new schedule. Moving further into the output, we have the exposure date and time. PK date and time. If available, the sample received date and time. Finally, in this example dummy study, an accession number. As you can see, it is the pulling together of data from different data sources into an independent and centralized tool which leads to great potential. With data now in one place, the TrackREX program is able to scan data for errors. A batch of edit checks chosen for this study is now able to run over this data. These edit checks are replacing what otherwise would typically be multiple, manually reviewed listings. The TrackREX program informs the user if an issue has been detected or not and, if so, what the issue is. For simplicity, only key columns of data are on view here. However, that doesn't mean the TrackREX program cannot deep dive into what this data actually means. For example, when the TrackREX team review protocol schedules they also factor in time windows around exposure. This means the TrackREX program understands if a sample is outside of time windows per protocol and will inform the user via an edit check. Such is the drill-down nature of this tool, important metrics can be derived. For example, sites struggling with schedules and possible need of retraining. Another example may be issues with packing or shipments. Another further example could be that, in a clinical patient setting, the per-protocol expectations were too demanding. Much, in this respect, can be revealed with what is in actuality very little data indeed. Let's move on. Next we have a review status column. Here records can be designated a status. These statuses are stored between data refreshes. Thus, double data review is eliminated. Should a record have new or changed data following a refresh, the status again becomes open. The new or changed data items are highlighted in a dark blue. Up until now, available text in the output is protected so that it cannot be overwritten with free text entries. But now we come to columns in which end-user interactions are free text. Even as our industry evolves towards a risk-based quality model, we continue to recommend a clinical data manager well experienced in vendor reconciliation is the responsible for this tool. This can take the form of client in-house personnel or a full onboarding of our TrackREX team in a consultancy capacity. Either way, we recommend it is the experienced clinical data manager that coordinates this task, stipulating who is the next to take action. Scrolling further to the right, in this example we also have multiple team members who can contribute to the resolution of a data issue. As always, the naming of these columns and whether they are present or not is up to the client. Yet with this example, we want to illustrate how lines of communication can work cross-functionally. So, for example, if this report was loaded to a secure SharePoint location, there is now the possibility for live-time interactions. There would no longer be a need for insecure, manual, compilation of reconciliation data issues across spreadsheets, emails, or team meetings. This would bring security, accuracy, speed, and an elimination of duplication. Indeed, this allows for a continued data review model, as opposed to fragmented and infrequent vendor reconciliation. All free entry texts are stored between data refreshes. We now move on to the redundant records worksheet. No work is performed here. Rather, this worksheet stores records that are now redundant, ghost records. For example, if a vendor mislabeled a sample as being unscheduled but then corrected this in a future data transfer to a scheduled sample, the scheduled sample will be in the user output. But the now non-existing ghost unscheduled record is in the redundant records worksheet. Thus, this merely stores records that are no longer in existence. It provides an archive of old records and helps the user of TrackREX understand what's happened with an issue they were trying to track. Again, no actual work is performed inside this worksheet. Finally, let's move on to the metrics worksheet. This worksheet provides a suite of pre-built charts and graphs based on what the client wished to be present. We will not go into detail of each and every chart and graph. But given how data from different data sources has been brought together, then will batches of edit checks run, all into a centralized location, we wish to show you how it is now possible to produce meaningful metrics. Metrics exist at study, country, and site level. Again, we will not go into detail of each and every chart and graph, but you can pause or slow this video as we click through examples. Missing samples or performance issues can be summarized. Charts and graphs can be copied from here and reformatted in preparation for your own internal meetings or communication. They can help target sites that may require additional assistance, training, or monitoring visits. Now we return to the slide deck and remaining slides. It is hoped that the next topics covered will be much clearer now you have actually seen the TrackREX output. Let's now look at what are the current industry challenges with CRF to vendor reconciliation. Reconciliation remains a commonplace issue for data management and operations alike. Let's look at some of the causes and how TrackREX is designed to overcome these obstacles.
Studies are inherently different from one another in schedule and study design, requiring the programming of reconciliation listings each time.
TrackREX is a purpose-built tool specifically for reconciliation. Our experienced TrackREX team understand protocol time and event schedules. Together with determining how raw data variables are named, these elements are simply mapped into the TrackREX tool. The TrackREX tool itself is not recoded.
Reconciliation solutions are in-house projects and never available industry-wide.
TrackREX has been built independently and outside of the pharma or CRO environment. The solution is system-independent Excel with the intent of offering an industry-wide solution.
Reconciliation, even when considered a single task, typically involves multiple listings that are manually reviewed. The scope for frequent data review is limited and often results in double data review. Unknown what's changed since.
TrackREX doesn't use listings. Edit checks are used in place of listings. In essence, the entire task is performed on just a single worksheet, marrying CRF and vendor data complete with listing automatic discrepancies for each record. Upon refreshing, all past comments are maintained. In effect, TrackREX could be considered akin to a query management system.
Excel cannot possibly be capable of achieving such a task.
Far too low-tech for this industry.
It's a common misconception that Excel is not capable of such complex, big data tasks. Indeed, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is the case. However, computing power has increased tremendously over the years, making Excel perfectly viable for difficult and specific tasks. When developed by individuals with knowledge of the task at hand, tasks that Excel may have once struggled with 20 or 30 years ago are now perfectly achievable. TrackREX works, it exists. You can try it out yourself via the online demonstration facility. CRF to vendor reconciliation can also be a misunderstood task.
I only have to make sure some key identifiers match between vendor and CRF, and my job is done.
What if the sample or tracking number was transcribed to the wrong time point? What if the sample or tracking number was transcribed to the wrong vial? What if samples or readings shouldn't have been taken at all? What if a site keeps on not respecting the protocol expectation? What if the protocol is too expecting of site staff and subjects and needs amending? The truth: the ultimate goal of CRF to vendor reconciliation is to ensure resulting data will meet analytical need. That said, to safeguard subject well-being and to ensure their study participation was not in vain, regular oversight and undertaking of the reconciliation task is required. All key points above must feature in the fundamental design and thinking behind any reconciliation system. We'll conclude this presentation with an illustration of how TrackREX, if adopted early in a study's life cycle, can see data discrepancies that would otherwise impact data analysis. When I say see, it's important to stress that no unblinded data is ever expected. Indeed, discrepancies can be seen purely on time points. The TrackREX team understands reconciliation is not about a simple CRF to lab cross-reference. In an environment of ever-increasing outsourcing, we understand the need for continued cross-department alignment. We understand what true reconciliation means. It starts by cleaning data to meet analytical need. Let's bring up tables of data present in the TrackREX output. Then see what this data will look like when analyzed. Our tool will scan 100% of data to check if sampling times were respected per protocol. The exposure date and time represents time point 0. When analyzed, dates and times of sampling are used to plot concentrations. Long before analysis, our tool will see discrepancies in timing so you don't have to. In this example, we can see the impact of incorrect sampling times being assigned to 2 samples. Our TrackREX team has over 50 years combined experience in clinical data management. Based on our experience, we estimate vendor data approaching database lock will often have around a 5% error rate. If TrackREX is implemented early, these cases would be corrected upstream. Upstream instead of last-minute queries or, even worse, not queried at all prior to lock. And here's what happens with early queries and data corrections. Thank you for watching. Feel free to get in touch if you feel this solution is a good fit for your studies.